Walter White was an ordinary man, a high school chemistry teacher, a quiet, calm man. He devoted his life to his students and his family, but in reality, he was a man oppressed and ignored by the system, a man who had abandoned his dreams. In the mornings, he went to school and lectured to disinterested students. In the evenings, he endured the humiliation of his boss at the car wash. At home, he lived an uneasy life because of economic difficulties, and even felt guilty for not being able to provide a better life for his son. But the real breaking point was something much bigger: the diagnosis of cancer. One day, when the doctor told him he had lung cancer, time stopped for Walter White. In that moment, he realized the truth. He had no control over his life. He was lost in the gears of the system. When he died, he would leave only debt. It was here that the dark side of an ordinary man began to emerge. Until that day, he had always kept quiet, always followed the rules, but now something changed. For the first time, he wanted to take charge of his own life. Moral decadence and the paradox of good versus evil. Walter White said at the outset that he was only doing this to provide security for his family. "I'm doing this for my family." His sentences were clear. His intentions seemed clear. But was it really so? At first, he took small steps. He was still the same old Walter when he cooked the first party with Jesse. He was frightened, suspicious, soul-searching. But then he saw the first body-crazy 8 dead. That's when things started to change. He knew he had to kill, but he still brought him food, talked to him. It took cold blood to kill a human being, but then he learned that Crazy 8 would betray him. That's where the hesitation ended. He strangled him to death, and at that moment, he started down a path of no return. He made excuses to himself. If I hadn't killed him, he would have killed me. I'm doing this for my family. This is just a one-off. But with each new offense, the line became more blurred. At first, he had boundaries. He thought he didn't want to kill, that he was just doing it to make money. But it wasn't just about making money anymore. He was now the one who made the rules. Over time, he began to believe his own excuses. At first, he was committing crimes to support his family. But when his ego kicked in, when he tasted power, that's when Walter White completely disappeared. At one point, when Skylar said to him, "You've got enough money now, why don't you stop?" Walter White said, "I'm not doing this for my family, I'm doing this for love." At that moment, all the masks fell off. Walter was no longer the quiet, well-meaning chemistry teacher. He was Heisenberg. Had Heisenberg always been inside Walter? Walter White initially seemed like a desperate man, trapped between the gears of the system, trying to do something for his family. But over time, we saw that something much bigger began to awaken inside Walter, a God complex. At first, he was just trying to make money for his family, but then he started to control people's lives with his decisions. At first, he didn't choose the people he had to kill. They somehow got in his way. But then he began to decide who lived and who died. His battle with Gus Fring became a power play. He manipulated Jesse's life, used him, tricked him. He killed Mike without blinking an eye. And in the end, he inevitably found himself on top. At some point, Walter White was no longer just a crime lord. He began to see himself as a kind of god. One of the scenes that best illustrates this is when his wife asks him, "What do you think will happen if you go to the police?" Skylar thought Walter might get killed, but Walter looked at her and said, "You misunderstand me, Skylar. I'm not danger. When danger knocks, I'm the one who opens the door." At that moment, Walter White was completely transformed into Heisenberg. He now saw himself as a self-determining, rule-breaking man at the pinnacle of power. But the God complex always leads to a downfall at some point, because when a man feels invincible, when he sets his own rules, he eventually loses control, and that was inevitable for Walter White. The empire he had built would collapse because of his own arrogance. But until the moment of collapse came, Walter continued to think of himself as a holy being, always saying, "I am the danger," the inevitability of collapse. Power is one of the greatest tests of human nature. Throughout history, all those who have considered themselves invincible, independent of rules and absolute rulers, have met with the same fate: collapse. But why? Does power really corrupt people, or does it reveal what is already inside us? When does a person start to overstep boundaries? At first, he makes small decisions, perhaps with good intentions, but over time, power ceases to be just a tool for him and becomes a goal. He wants to earn more, control more, dominate more, because power is not like money after a certain point. It has no limits. When a person has $100 million, he usually finds it enough. But power? Power has no limits. That's why people become more and more ruthless to stay on top. According to Nietzsche, the will to power is the most basic human drive. To survive, to control, to rise above others. It is in our nature. But the danger of power is this. Once you reach your peak, you reach a point of no return. You can no longer go back to your old life because power has transformed you. This is where Lord Acton's classic quote comes in. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. When we look at history, even the greatest empires have fallen after reaching their peak. Rome, the Ottomans, the Soviets, Napoleon, Hitler, all of them thought themselves invincible at one point and then collapsed just as quickly. Because a person with a God complex begins to forget his greatest enemy, himself. The real enemy is not others, but the arrogance within oneself. At some point, you think you have everything under control, but control is actually the greatest illusion. After a while, you don't control the power. The power starts to control you. And here comes the most critical point. If you use power for self-gratification, your downfall is inevitable, because power is the biggest fire that can devour you as much as it feeds you. So, what is the solution? Who are those who have power and survive? Those who want power only for themselves will always fall, but those who use power for a purpose leave a longer mark in history. Philosopher kings like Marcus Aurelius, leaders like Gandhi, or visionaries like Elon Musk. What was the difference between these names? Power did not define their personality. Power was only a tool. You have to ask yourself, if one day you had unlimited power, how would you use it? If you want power only for self-gratification, your downfall is inevitable. But if you can direct it to a real purpose, then you can have infinite influence. So the real issue is not having power, but knowing how to manage it. Carl Jung says that man has more than one face, persona, the mask we wear in society, our good and acceptable face, shadow, the dark aspects that we suppress inside us, anger, ambition, arrogance, violence. For years, Walter White has maintained his persona impeccably. A respected teacher, a devoted father, a good husband. But was this persona his true self? Or was his repressed shadow more real? The more a man represses his shadow, the more violently it returns. It was the same with Walter White. Heisenberg had always been inside him, but it started to come out when he was diagnosed with cancer. Jung said, "If you don't face your shadow, it will take control of your life." That's exactly what Walter did. First he didn't recognize it, then he denied it. Then one day it came, and he surrendered to it. We all carry a persona, on social media, at work, with our family. But do we really know who we are? Can the things we suppress inside us explode one day? Are the things that make us who we are really ours? Or are they identities imposed on us by society? Is freedom really about being able to make our own choices? Walter White's story is a warning for all of us. If we reject, suppress, ignore the truth inside us, one day that truth may explode beyond our control.